The night was cold, and the sky above the ruined city was dark with smoke. Broken towers stood like dead giants, and the ground was covered with dust and ashes. The air smelled of burned metal and old fire. The war had ended years ago, but the wounds of the world were still open. Sergeant Daniel walked with his small squad through the ruins. Their boots made soft crunching sounds over broken glass and stone. The human soldiers were tired, but their eyes stayed sharp. They knew danger could still rise from the shadows. Even though the war was over, old enemies could still be hiding. Then, from behind a fallen wall, a weak voice whispered, "Please." Human. The sound was so soft that Daniel almost thought it was the wind. But then it came again, a desperate voice trembling. "Please, just one night, in your warm bed." The squad raised their rifles at once. Every soldier aimed at the figure that crawled out from the darkness. It was a woman, thin and shaking. Her skin was pale, almost silver, her clothes torn and dirty. Her eyes glowed faintly in the night, alien eyes. Daniel's heart jumped. She was not human, she was one of them. The soldiers cursed and tightened their fingers on the triggers. One of them shouted, "Stay back! Don't move!" But the alien woman only fell to her knees. Her body shook as if every breath was heavy. Tears ran down her face, making small lines in the dirt on her skin. "For 10 years, she whispered, her voice breaking. "For 10 years, I had no warm bed, no safe place, no gentle touch." Her hands pressed together, begging, "Please, just one night in your warm bed." The humans looked at each other, confused. Aliens had been their enemies for a whole decade. The war had taken millions of lives. Why would one of them come here begging for comfort? Why would she speak like a broken soul instead of a soldier? Daniel lowered his rifle slightly, but his team warned him. "Sergeant, don't listen. It could be a trap. Look at her, she's trying to trick us." But Daniel studied the woman closely. Her body was too weak to fight, her eyes too full of pain to lie. He asked, his voice firm but calm, "Why would you ask this from a human? Why not from your own kind?" The woman closed her eyes and shook her head. "My kind has no warmth left, only cold and cruelty." Her voice trembled, yet it carried truth. "You humans, you keep your warmth, even in war." The squad stayed tense, rifles still pointed. The night air was heavy, every second felt long. The woman's breathing grew weaker, and she almost collapsed. She whispered again, "I am not here to fight, not here to trick. I only beg for one night." Daniel felt a weight inside his chest. He remembered the years of battle, the faces of friends lost. He remembered how the enemy showed no mercy. But now here was one of them, broken, begging. It made no sense, and yet it made him pause. The squad leader in him wanted to order his men to push her away, but the human in him, the part that still believed in kindness, could not. He stepped closer, lowering his rifle completely. The other soldiers gasped in disbelief. "Sergeant, are you crazy?" one whispered. But Daniel kept his eyes on the alien woman. Her shoulders shook as she realized he had not shot her. Her glowing eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "Thank you." Even for this moment, thank you. Daniel knew nothing was simple here. She might carry secrets. She might carry danger. But there was something in her words, something human-like in her suffering. And in that moment, he understood something. The war had made monsters of both sides, but sometimes in the ashes of hate, small sparks of humanity remained. Even if it came from an alien's lips, the other soldiers kept their weapons ready. But Daniel slowly reached out his hand. "Stand up," he said, his voice steady. "If you are truly begging for warmth, then tonight you will have it." The woman gasped softly, as if she could not believe it. Her thin fingers trembled as she touched his hand. Her body was cold, colder than any human should be. Daniel felt the shiver of her skin, and he understood the truth. She was not lying. For 10 long years, this creature had lived without warmth, without comfort, without peace. The soldiers around them still muttered their doubts. But Daniel gave a sharp glance, and they fell silent. The squad moved on, the alien woman walking weakly beside them, her steps unsteady, her face still wet with tears. Above them, the broken city groaned in the wind. The ruins held many secrets, many dangers. But now something strange and new had begun. A human soldier and an alien beggar walking side by side. No one knew if it was a mistake or a miracle, but it was the start of something that would change, both of them forever. Long before the begging stranger appeared in the ruins, there had been fire across the stars. The war between humans and the alien race, the Vayari, had lasted 10 endless years. It was not a short war, not a clean war. It was the kind of war that burned worlds and broke spirits. The Vayari had been the first to strike. They came with ships like black knives cutting through the sky. They came with energy weapons that tore through steel as if it was paper. Their leaders called humans primitive, and they swore humanity would kneel. But humans did not kneel. They bled, they cried, but they stood. At first, the Vayari had every advantage. They were older, faster, and their empire stretched across many star systems. They believed humans were only children playing with fire, but humans had something the Vayari could not measure. A stubborn will, a fire inside that refused to die. Every city destroyed only made humans fight harder. Every life lost became fuel for their anger, and slowly, painfully, the war became balanced. The Vayari expected humans to break, but humans refused. The war that was supposed to be quick stretched into a decade. World after world became graves. Mountains shattered, oceans boiled, skies burned red. Entire generations knew nothing but fear and hunger. Yet the humans adapted, building weapons faster than the Vayari expected, learning their strategies, finding their weaknesses. The Vayari soldiers were proud and strong, but their leaders grew cruel. They kept the best food, the warm shelters, the safe places. The civilians of the Vayari began to suffer. They were told to stay silent, told the humans were monsters. But the truth was different. Humans, even in war, shared their last bread with their children. The Vayari leaders in their golden halls left their own people cold and starving. The war tore both. Species apart, families on both sides vanished. Names were forgotten in the ashes, but one difference grew clear. Humans fought for survival, but they also fought for each other. The Vayari fought because their rulers commanded them to. The heart of their war was fear and control, not hope. Sergeant Daniel had lived through it all. He had seen cities fall, seen comrades die. He had looked into the eyes of Vayari warriors across the battlefield. Some were fierce, some were merciless. But sometimes he had seen something else in their eyes, a question, a doubt, as if they wondered why they were truly fighting. The begging woman, fragile and trembling in the ruins, was proof of that doubt. For 10 years she had not known warmth, not known kindness, not because of humans, but because her own leaders had abandoned her. Daniel thought of this as he marched through the broken streets. Every shattered building told a story of the war. Every empty window was like an eye watching him, whispering of the past. The war had not just broken planets, it had broken trust. No human trusted a Vayari, no Vayari trusted a human. And yet here was one Vayari woman walking beside a human squad, her steps weak, her breath shallow, her eyes heavy with years of suffering. She did not speak much as they walked, but Daniel noticed how she looked at the smallest things with wonder. A small fire in a soldier's lamp, the steam rising from a human's breath. To her, these were treasures, as if she had been denied them for so long. One soldier muttered, "Why do they always want to take what's ours?" Another whispered, "She's probably leading us into a trap." But Daniel stayed silent, watching her. Something about her story matched what he had seen in the war. The proud Vayari were not as whole as they pretended. Inside their empire, cracks had already formed, cracks big enough to swallow their own people. The begging stranger was not just one alien. She was a symbol of what the war had done. Her body carried the scars of hunger. Her voice carried the weight of betrayal. She was living proof that even the powerful could be broken. And yet, Daniel wondered, why had she come to humans for warmth? Why not to her own kind, her own people? The answer was clear, though painful. Her own people had turned away from her. Her leaders had stolen everything, even the right to rest in a warm bed. And so, after 10 years of darkness, she had turned to the only ones left. The humans. The ones who had fought her people for a decade. Because in all the fire and death, humans still held on to something the Ve'eri had lost. Compassion. The war had broken worlds. But maybe, Daniel thought, it had also revealed the truth. That strength was not only in weapons, not only in power, but in the strange, stubborn kindness of humanity. And perhaps that was why she begged not for food, not for riches, not for freedom, but simply for one night in a warm bed. The fire crackled softly in the middle of the ruined hall. The human squad had made camp inside the broken remains of what once had been a great library. Books had turned to ash long ago, but the stone walls still gave some shelter from the cold. The soldiers sat in a circle, their rifles close, their eyes always watching. And at the edge of the firelight, the alien woman sat alone, her thin arms wrapped around herself. She looked fragile, more fragile than any enemy they had ever faced in battle. Her silver skin was marked with dirt and scars, her clothes torn and hanging loose, the flames reflected in her glowing eyes. But there was no pride left in them, only exhaustion, only the quiet ache of someone who had walked too long in darkness. The men whispered to each other. One said, "We should tie her up just in case." Another muttered, "Or leave her outside. She'll bring trouble." Their voices carried fear, suspicion, and anger. For them, the memory of war was still sharp. They remembered comrades lost, families burned, friends buried. To them, she was not a stranger in need. She was a symbol of the enemy. Daniel sat apart from the others, his gaze fixed on the woman. He could hear their whispers, but he also heard her soft breathing, uneven and weak. She had not asked for food, though she was starving. She had not asked for weapons, though they carried plenty. She had asked for something far simpler. One night of warmth, one night of safety. The choice pressed heavily on him. He was their leader here, and the decision was his. If he turned her away, his soldiers would support him. If he showed her mercy, they might call him a fool. But Daniel remembered her words. "My kind has no warmth left, only cold and cruelty." And something in those words had stuck in his heart like a blade. He rose to his feet, his heavy boots echoing on the cracked floor. The men turned to him at once, their eyes questioning. Daniel walked to the edge of the firelight, standing before the woman. She looked up slowly as if she did not believe he would even come close. Her hands trembled, her voice barely a whisper. "Will you cast me out?" Daniel crouched so his eyes were level with hers. Her gaze was tired, filled with pain, yet there was also a small spark hidden deep inside. It was the spark of hope. Fragile but alive. "No," Daniel said firmly, his voice steady. "You will stay here tonight?" The woman gasped softly, her hands covering her mouth as if she could not believe it. The other soldiers erupted at once. "Sergeant, are you out of your mind?" One shouted, "She's the enemy." Another barked, but Daniel stood tall and looked at them. "She is one person," he said. "Not an army, not a soldier, not anymore. If we cannot give one night of warmth to a broken soul, then what did we fight for?" The words cut through the room. The men fell silent, though their faces were still hard. They trusted Daniel, even if they did not agree. Slowly, they returned to their places, watching with wary eyes. But none of them dared to go against their leader's command. The woman lowered her head, tears falling onto the dusty floor. She whispered, "You are different. Humans are different." Daniel sat near her, though not too close. "Tell me," he asked softly. "Why come to us? Why not to your own?" Her voice cracked as she answered, "Because my own people left me to die, year after year. Night after night, they gave me nothing." She lifted her head and met his gaze. "You humans, even in war, you never forgot how to care for each other. I saw it. I envied it. I longed for it." Daniel's chest grew tight as he listened. He thought of the many nights his squad had shared fire, food, and stories. even in the worst places. He thought of how even in destruction, humans held onto small pieces of kindness. And he realized that was what she had been searching for all along. Not victory, not survival, but the simple gift of being treated like a living being. The firelight danced between them. The soldiers tried to sleep, though their eyes opened often to check on her. Daniel remained awake, keeping watch, his rifle resting across his lap. But his thoughts were not on danger. His thoughts were on her words. For the first time since the war ended, he began to wonder if maybe the enemy was not as simple as he had been told. The night grew colder, and the wind howled through the broken windows. The woman shivered, clutching herself tightly. Daniel sighed and removed his own blanket, tossing it to her. She froze, staring at it as if it was treasure. Slowly, she pulled it around her shoulders. Her glowing eyes glistened with fresh tears. She whispered again, so soft it was almost a prayer. "Thank you, human. Thank you." Daniel leaned back against the stone wall. His decision was made, and he would carry the weight of it. Perhaps she was a danger. Perhaps she carried secrets. But in that moment, she was simply a life in need. And sometimes, the hardest choice in war was not pulling the trigger, but lowering the weapon and offering a hand. The choice had been made. And though the men did not yet see it, that one choice would change everything that came after. The fire had burned low, its glow fading into red embers. Most of the soldiers were asleep now, their bodies curled against the cold stone floor. Only Daniel remained awake, his rifle across his lap, his eyes scanning the dark corners of the ruined library. The alien woman sat near the dying fire, her face half hidden by the blanket he had given her. Her eyes reflected the faint light like small stars in the shadow. The night was quiet, too quiet. Daniel had lived through enough battles to know that silence could be as dangerous as gunfire. But tonight the silence was broken, not by an enemy attack, but by the soft voice of the woman. "Human," she whispered, almost afraid to speak. Daniel turned his head toward her, saying nothing, only waiting. Her fingers twisted the edge of the blanket as if she feared it might be taken from her. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice trembling. Daniel leaned forward, slightly, his tone calm but sharp. "What is it?" She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the soldiers sleeping nearby. "They will not believe me," she whispered, "but maybe you will." Her voice carried a weight, the weight of 10 years of silence. And slowly, like a dam cracking, the truth began to spill out. "Our leaders lied to us," she said, her breath quick and shallow. "They told us you were monsters that you came to destroy, that you came to take everything from us." She closed her eyes as if the memory burned. "We believed them, we obeyed, we fought, but the truth was different." Daniel's grip on his rifle tightened, but he did not interrupt. The woman's voice grew stronger as she spoke, as if the words themselves gave her strength. "Our people had enough food, enough warmth, enough medicine, but the leaders kept it for themselves. They let the cities starve, they let families freeze, they told us it was the humans' fault." Her eyes glistened with tears, her voice breaking. But it was not the humans, it was them, it was always them. The flames hissed softly, as if the fire itself listened. Daniel felt his chest tighten, the anger inside him mixing with sorrow. He had seen the cruelty of the Vayari on the battlefield, but hearing this truth was different. This was not the voice of a warrior or a commander. This was the voice of someone who had lived through betrayal. The enemy had been suffering too, suffering under their own rulers. "Why tell me this?" Daniel asked quietly. "Why now?" Her hands shook as she pressed them to her chest. "Because I cannot carry it alone anymore," she whispered. "For 10 years, I lived in shadows, hiding, begging, watching my people die not from your bullets but from hunger, from cold, from silence." Her eyes met his, glowing with desperate honesty. "I came to you not only for warmth but because I had no one left who would listen." Daniel's jaw tightened, his thoughts heavy. The soldiers would never believe her. They would say she was lying, trying to manipulate them. But Daniel had seen lies before. He had seen men beg falsely. He had seen prisoners trick their guards. This was different. Her voice carried no trick, only pain. He could feel the truth in her words, even if he wished he could deny it. "You humans," she said, her tone softer now, almost a whisper. "You shared bread even when you had little. You buried your dead with care, you fought for each other, not only for victory, and when I saw, I realized, we lost not because you were stronger, but because you remembered how to be alive." She covered her face with her hands, her body shaking. "And my people, my proud people, we forgot." Daniel looked into the dying fire, his thoughts racing. If what she said was true, the war had not been only between humans and Vayari. It had been between the rulers and the broken, between cruelty and compassion. It meant the enemy he had fought for 10 years was not her, not the starving families, but the ones who hid behind palaces and lies. The woman lowered her hands slowly, her face streaked with tears. "I do not ask you to forgive me," she said. "I only ask you to believe me, so that when I am gone, someone remembers that not all of us wanted this war." Daniel leaned closer, his voice steady but filled with something he had not felt in a long time. "Understanding." "I believe you," he said. Her eyes widened as if those 3 words were more precious than food or fire. She bowed her head, whispering, "Then I am not alone anymore." The night stretched on, heavy with secrets. The soldiers still slept, unaware of the truth that had been spoken only a few feet away. But Daniel knew, and the woman knew, and in that ruined library, surrounded by the ashes of the past, something fragile but powerful was born. Not trust, not yet, but the beginning of it. The darkness held many dangers, but inside that circle of faint firelight, 2 enemies had spoken as broken souls, and the truth they shared would change the path ahead. For secrets once spoken cannot be buried again. The sun rose weakly over the ruined city, its pale light sliding through cracks in broken walls. The soldiers stirred from their uneasy sleep, stretching stiff muscles and rubbing tired eyes. The fire was nothing but ashes now, cold gray dust that spoke of the long night. Daniel was already awake, standing guard at the doorway, watching the streets with careful eyes. Beside the crumbled wall, the alien woman sat quietly, her blanket wrapped around her thin body. She had not slept, not truly. Her glowing eyes had remained half open through the night, haunted by memories too heavy for dreams. When she finally lifted her head, she spoke softly, her voice fragile yet urgent. "Human, I must tell you something else." Daniel turned to her, sensing the weight in her tone. "This is not just about me, not just about the warmth I begged for," she whispered. "There is more, much more, and you must listen." The soldiers glanced toward them, already suspicious. One muttered, "Here it comes, the trick." Another tightened his grip on his rifle, but Daniel held up a hand, silencing them. "Speak," he said to her, his voice steady. Her lips trembled before she answered. "There is a place deep within the ruins of my people where the leaders still hide. They live in warmth and luxury while the rest starve in the cold." Her hands clenched the blanket tighter, as if the thought alone filled her with rage. "I know the path, the tunnels, the codes that guard it," she said, her voice growing stronger. "If you act, if you follow me, you can reach them. You can end this war not with more fire, but with truth." The squad erupted with disbelief. "You see?" One soldier snapped. "She wants to lead us into a trap." "Why? Would she betray her own kind?" Another demanded, but the woman's eyes burned with a desperate light. "Because they are not my kind anymore," she said, her words like steel. "They abandoned us. They used us. They fed us lies while they dined on riches. They do not deserve loyalty, not from me, not from anyone." Daniel's mind raced, the weight of her words pressing heavily on him. Could she be telling the truth, or was this the most dangerous lie of all? If she spoke truth, then this was more than a chance to strike at the enemy. This was a chance to end the suffering, to cut the war at its root. But if it was a lie, then leading his men into the tunnels would mean certain death. He studied her face carefully, searching for cracks, for signs of deceit, but all he saw was pain, anger, and the stubborn will of someone who had lost everything. She was not begging this time. She was offering something, risking something, a secret too dangerous to speak aloud. "Why tell me?" Daniel asked, his voice calm but sharp. "Why not keep this hidden?" Her breath shook as she answered. "Because I cannot destroy them alone," she whispered. "I tried. For years I carried the knowledge, but I'm only one, broken and hunted." Her eyes locked on his, fierce and pleading. "You humans fight not for kings, not for palaces, you fight for each other. That is why you must know, that is why you must act." The squad muttered in low voices, doubt heavy in their words. "She's playing you, Sergeant, don't you see? Even if she's telling the truth, it's suicide." But Daniel did not silence them this time. He let the arguments rise, for he too was torn. Every choice in war carried risk. But this one was different. This choice could change everything. He turned back to the woman, his eyes hard. "If we follow you, if we risk our lives on this path, what waits for us?" Her answer was sharp, without hesitation. "The heart of corruption," she said. "The place where your enemies sit in comfort while their people beg in the cold." Her voice dropped lower, her tone almost a whisper. "And if you strike, there if you reveal them, both humans and Vayari will see the truth." Daniel stood in silence, his mind turning like storm clouds. His men stared at him, waiting for his word, waiting for his decision. The woman's eyes never left his, filled with a fire that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with justice. Finally he spoke, his voice steady but heavy. "We will consider it," he said. The soldiers groaned, some shaking their heads, but none dared to challenge him directly. The woman lowered her head, not in defeat, but in patience. She had planted the seed, and now it was up to him to let it grow. The morning stretched on, the squad preparing to move again. But the air was different now, heavier. It was no longer just a march through ruins, no longer just a mission of survival. Now there was a path before them, hidden in the darkness, a path that could lead to victory or to death. Daniel strapped his rifle to his back, his eyes on the horizon. The choice was not yet made, but he could feel it coming closer. The woman's words echoed in his mind. A chance to end the war, not with fire, but with truth. And deep down, in the silence of his own heart, Daniel wondered if humanity's greatest weapon was not their guns, but their ability to believe in something more. The ruins grew darker as the squad followed the narrow streets. Shadows stretched long across shattered stone, and the wind howled like a restless ghost. The alien woman walked ahead, her steps unsteady but her direction sure. She carried no weapon, only the blanket Daniel had given her, wrapped tight around her shoulders. Behind her, the soldiers marched, in silence, their rifles ready. Their eyes never leaving her back, each man carried the same question in his heart. Was she leading them toward hope or toward death? Daniel kept his place close to her, his hand always near his weapon. His mind turned like storm clouds, every step pressing the weight of his choice deeper into him. The tunnel she spoke of lay beneath the ruins of a broken tower. Once it had been a place of pride for her people, tall and shining. Now it was only rubble and dust, a skeleton of power turned into a grave. She stopped at the base of the ruins, her glowing eyes staring into the cracks of stone. Her voice trembled as she whispered, "Here the path begins." The soldiers muttered behind Daniel, their fear spilling into harsh words. "This is it, Sergeant. She's going to bury us down there. Better to shoot her now before she leads us any deeper." But Daniel raised his hand, silencing them. He studied the woman, her face pale, her lips tight. There was no triumph in her expression, no hidden smile of a betrayer, only sorrow, only the weight of memory. With shaking fingers she pulled away chunks of rock, revealing a narrow stair that twisted into darkness. The smell of damp stone and rusted metal rose from below, the kind of air that had not seen light for years. "This way," she whispered, stepping carefully onto the stairs. Daniel followed, his men reluctantly behind, their boots echoing through the hollow passage. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. Their lamps cast thin beams of light across walls marked with strange symbols. The tunnels felt alive, every sound bouncing back as whispers. The woman walked ahead, her voice low as she spoke to herself. I remember these paths. They told us never to come here, they told us it was forbidden, but I learned, I remembered, I survived. Finally, the narrow passage opened into a vast chamber. The soldiers froze, staring in shock. Before them stretched a hidden city beneath. The ruins. Metal walls gleamed faintly with stolen energy. Machines hummed with quiet power. And there in the center a palace of shining glass and steel stood untouched by war. Inside its walls they could see movement. Figures dressed in fine clothes, eating, drinking, living in warmth. The soldiers, cursed under their breath, their anger sharp and bitter. All this time, one muttered, we fought and bled while they lived like kings. Another spat. She was telling the truth. Daniel's jaw clenched as he looked at the scene. It was worse than he had imagined, worse than even the woman's words. The leaders had hidden. Here safe while both human and Vayari soldiers died above them. The woman's eyes filled with tears, her voice shaking. They left us to starve. While they feasted, they told us it was you, that you were the monsters, but it was them all along. Her knees buckled as she fell to the cold ground, her hands clutching the blanket. I have carried this for 10 years. The truth, the anger, the shame, and now you see it. The soldiers turned to Daniel, their faces a storm of rage and disbelief. What do we do, Sergeant? One asked, his voice sharp. Do we strike them down? Do we bring them out? Every man looked to him, waiting for his command. But Daniel's eyes were on the woman, who knelt trembling in the dust. She lifted her head, meeting his gaze with fire and fear. I brought you here. Now you must choose, she said. Strike and the truth will burn bright. The people will see who the real monsters are. Or leave, and nothing will change. The war will return, the lies will continue. Her words cut through the silence like blades. The men muttered again, divided between doubt and fury. Some still feared betrayal, others wanted vengeance. Daniel's heart pounded as he stood between them, his mind torn. If this was a trap, the cost would be their lives. But if it was truth, this was the chance to end it all. The chamber seemed to close in around them. The humming machines, the glowing palace, the weight of history pressing down. Daniel felt the eyes of his men, the trembling hope of the woman, and the shadow of the leaders inside the palace. And he knew that whatever he chose next would decide, more than their mission, it would decide the future of two worlds. The soldiers tightened their grips on their rifles, waiting for the order. The woman whispered one last time, her voice shaking with both fear and hope. This is your moment, human, not mine. And Daniel's chest tightened as he realized she was right. The final choice was his, not hers, not his men's, not even his commander's. His alone. The chamber was silent but for the hum of machines. The weight of betrayal and redemption hung heavy in the air. And in that silence, Sergeant Daniel prepared to speak. Prepared to decide whether the alien woman had led them into death or into history. The chamber was heavy with silence, the hum of machines echoing like distant drums. The hidden city glowed with false beauty, its shining palace standing proud in the shadows of ruins. Inside those glass walls, the leaders of the Vayari feasted, their laughter soft, their hands full of stolen comfort. Outside, in the cold, Daniel and his soldiers stood on the edge of history. Beside them, the alien woman trembled, her eyes locked on the palace that had betrayed her people. The soldiers shifted restlessly, their anger sharp. One whispered, "We could end them right now." Another hissed, "Let's burn it. I'll make them pay." But Daniel held up his hand and silence fell again. His eyes never left the palace, but his thoughts ran deeper than vengeance. He turned to the woman, his voice calm but heavy. "Is this what you wanted me to see?" Her face was pale, her tears fresh, but her voice was steady. "Yes, human, this is the truth I carried, the truth I could not bury. They called you monsters, but look, who are the monsters here?" The soldiers muttered in agreement, their hatred rising, but Daniel remained still, his heart beating with a different rhythm. He remembered the woman's first words, whispered in the ruins. For 10 years I had no warm bed. Please, just one night. That was not the voice of an enemy. That was the voice of someone broken, someone forgotten. He took a deep breath, his decision forming like steel. No, he said firmly, his voice carrying through the chamber. The soldiers froze, staring at him in shock. No? One demanded. Sergeant, they're right there. We can finish this. Daniel's eyes narrowed, his words sharp but steady. If we strike in anger, we become like them. If we show the truth, we become something greater. The woman's glowing eyes widened, hope flickering inside them. What will you do? She asked softly, her voice trembling. Daniel turned to his squad, his voice strong. We will take the evidence. We will show the worlds. We will let both humans and Vayari see what has been hidden. His soldiers hesitated, torn between rage and loyalty, but one by one they lowered their weapons, trusting his choice. The woman let out a trembling breath, her shoulders shaking. For the first time in years, she felt something stir inside her. It was not fear, not despair, but a fragile spark of hope. She whispered, "You are different. Humans are truly different." The squad moved with caution, capturing images of the palace, the feasting leaders, the glowing towers of stolen power. Every piece of evidence was proof that could not be silenced. The woman guided them through, the shadows pointing to secret chambers, storage rooms filled with food, medicines, warmth that had been denied to her people. The soldiers' anger burned hotter, but Daniel kept them focused. Not revenge, he reminded, justice. Hours passed before they returned to the surface, climbing from the tunnels back into the ruined city above. The dawn sky burned orange and red, the light of a new day cutting through the dust. The soldiers carried their evidence, but Daniel carried something heavier, the knowledge that his choice had changed the course of history. Beside him, the woman walked slowly, her body weak but her spirit stronger than it had been in years. That night when the squad made camp again, Daniel watched as she sat quietly by the fire. Her eyes followed the flames, her hands still clutching the blanket he had given her. The soldiers, though still cautious, no longer looked at her as an enemy. They looked at her as something else, something they did not yet have a word for. When the fire burned low and the cold night crept close, Daniel stood and walked to her. He reached into his pack and pulled out a spare roll, a blanket, thicker and warmer than the first. Without a word, he placed it beside her. She looked up at him in silence, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. Slowly, she pulled the blanket around herself, feeling its warmth sink into her skin. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they were not only tears of sorrow, they were tears of relief, of something long denied, but finally found. She whispered, her voice breaking. For 10 years, no warmth, no kindness, no bed. Her fingers pressed against the blanket as if it was the most precious treasure in the world. And now you give me this. Her glowing eyes met his, shining through the tears. You gave me warmth, when my own kind gave me none. Daniel said nothing, but in his silence was understanding. The soldiers watched quietly, their anger softened by the simple sight of compassion. And in that moment, the alien woman was no longer just a beggar, no longer just an enemy. She was a soul saved by something greater than war. She was proof that even after fire and blood, humanity could still choose kindness. The night grew darker, but the fire glowed steady, and for the first time in 10 long years she closed her eyes and slept in peace. Not as an enemy, not as a soldier, not as a ghost of war, but as someone who had finally found warmth. And as Daniel watched over her, he knew this was not the end of their story, but the beginning of something far greater. Because sometimes, the strongest victory was not won with weapons, but with the simple act of offering a warm bed,